And finally, I'm going to present, going back to the question of Ukraine, the nice words that we had from President Taras Dobko, that basically in Rome here, right now there are several panels in the European Academy of Religion dedicated to Ukraine war religion. And we are organizing not only a public panel on the crisis within Ukrainian Orthodoxy and how this affects global Orthodoxy, the schism, but also we are going to have a workshop, a whole day workshop with representatives of the three, what I call the three Kievan churches and the three Romes. The idea is to bring not only the two Orthodox churches together to talk to one another in public, but also to include the Eastern Christians from the Catholic tradition, namely those Ukrainians that belong both to the Catholic affiliation, or say faithful, but also are faithful to the Eastern tradition, to the one from which they receive, from the Kievan Rus receive Christianity. So I will then, so let me begin with preliminary remarks on dialogue between persons, not between ideas, doctrines, or ideologies. This, which is fundamental for any type of ecumenical dialogue, if you are going to discuss theological dogmas, you will not get very far in any ecumenical dialogue. The first most important fact is to recognize the other as an equal human being with the dignity of every human person. So by persons, I mean not just individuals. There is a fundamental difference between individuals and persons. Individuals are precisely what makes each of us unique and different, in the sense that we are perhaps younger or older, we are more strong or weaker, we'll be more beautiful, more wealthy. But this is what precisely differentiates us as individuals. And it's this kind of mother individualism based on this notion of the autonomous individual that was always a very difficult idea to accept for the Catholic Church. Only when the Catholic Church finally realized that we are talking not really of individuals in the liberal sense of individualism, but of the human dignity of each and every human person, of every individual. And what is crucial is that this human dignity precisely comes from that which we all share. And we share precisely, this what we share is most evident in the weakest, in the most vulnerable of us humans. It is the sacred dignity of the human person, which is shared by the most defenseless babies and the most dependent older people, that are really what indicates this fundamental notion of the dignity of the human person. And it is this equal dignity that is what we need to see in the other when we enter dialogue. Later, of course, will come all the differences and the particular ideas that these persons have, and why we have difficulties talking to them, and why we may have actually conflicts, because we are thinking that they are perhaps unjust to us. But first, before we have a possibility of serious dialogue and come into a possibility of peacemaking and reconciliation, we need to go first through the process of recognizing the equal dignity of each human person, despite their actions, even their ideologies, their ideas. But precisely, this is fundamental. And this is fundamental not only in ecumenical dialogue, but in political process of recognition. Only when people recognize each other as equals, as equal citizens again. And equal citizens come from this fact that they share we the people, not necessarily because they are of the same class, the same ethnic group, the same religion, the same gender, the same age, whatever. It is this solidarity based on the fact of common citizenship, that we have something in common. We have to work together in our political system for the good of all, for the good of the country, for the good of the nation, and for the good of all, for the common good. So this is fundamental. This issue of recognition of the other as equal is, and this is, of course, what is the process of democracy, of equal recognition of each citizen as being equal in worth and in dignity. And that's why it's not a question of how rich I am, how poor I am, how intelligent I am, how clever I am. It is really each person has the same value as a citizen when it comes to the fundamental political processes. This is the principle of democracy, majority rule, which of course also demands not only majority rule, but the protection of the rights of minorities, those which are different, so the majority doesn't use its power to precisely dominate minorities. Okay, so this is basically the first idea. One will have to think that in our political system, one doesn't need to begin with those principles. But precisely in our age of polarization, we see how politicians that were able to talk across the aisle in parliaments today are unable to even recognize each other as equals, and they only see each other as enemies that basically then we do not recognize and with whom we cannot work together for the common good. So today, in our political system, in our civil society, we need once again to begin from the most elementary notions that are necessary to have fruitful dialogue and to be able to work together for the common good. And for this, when Pope Francis began stressing again and again the culture of the encounter, I understood, yes, of course, across civilizations, across world religions, across different cultures. But he insisted, no, we need it in our own cultures. We need once again to really focus on the importance of the culture of the encounter, to encounter the other as basically somebody with the same dignity, human dignity that comes from being all children of God. So it is this idea then of having to go beyond yourself, to be open to encounter the others as equals, and to be able, therefore, to change your own position, to be able to really change your own ideas and your own person in this encounter with the other. So these are the two, I would argue, fundamental basic ideas that we need to recover in our political life. Of course, in a situation like Ukraine, where precisely we are talking of extremely polarized the two Ukrainian Orthodox churches, and extreme polarization, of course, between Ukrainians and Russians, those are principles that will need to be taken into account to eventually open a process of peacemaking, just peacemaking, truth, and reconciliation. And in order to work together to reconstruct Ukrainian society, it will be necessary to a certain extent, to struggle with the issue of transitional justice, of punishing the crimes of the enemy before we even begin to consider the possibility of reconciliation. So I think that this is an important aspect that we will need to take into account in the process of reconstruction of society. Let me, as you know, after wars, especially after civil wars, and of course there is an aspect in the Ukrainian conflict that had aspects also of some element of civil war between brothers, between Orthodox brothers, and between people that to a certain extent separate from the political regimes, the kind of the colonialism that was imposed by the regime. There was true normal relations also between peoples, the same situation that we discuss about the polarization between Ukrainians and Poles. So we need to once again in the same way that Poles, for instance, had also a problem with the Germans, right? Germans had invaded them. It was a question of who started the war. And yet it was the Polish church that started the process of writing a letter to the German bishops asking for forgiveness for what the Poles did to them so that they could begin the process of reconciliation. In the same way that it was during World War II, when French Catholics and German Catholics were in conflict with one another. France and Germany had been at war with one another for 70 years. It was Catholics, French Catholics in the resistance, that while the war was still going on, came to the conclusion that it was they that had to go to the German Catholics and start the process of reconciliation. They had to initiate the process. So in this respect, Ukraine, that was the one that was victimized, that was precisely the one that was occupied and was the victim, nonetheless, will have to start the process of opening up to the enemy in order to eventually reach a reconciliation. Russia and Ukraine are going to be always neighbors, whether they want to be neighbors or not. And the question is, which kind of neighbors are going to be? Those who do not talk to one another, enemies, despite the fact that they are perhaps the majority belonging to the same Orthodox Church. And yet today, of course, the Ukrainian conflict has led to a fundamental schism within global Orthodoxy between the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the Patriarchate of Moscow. And there will be a need eventually for a reconciliation. In the same way, the ecumenical dialogue between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, especially between the Pope and the Patriarch of Constantinople, has been well advanced for over 40, 50 years now. There will be a need for a process of reconciliation between the Patriarchs of Moscow and Constantinople. And because the two churches, the two Orthodox churches in Ukraine, are related to these two patriarchs, in the same way that the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is related to the Patriarch of Rome, to the Pope, the relation between the three churches in Ukraine will be also the key for the ecumenical relations between the three Romes, in the same way that the ecumenical relation between the three Romes will be fundamental condition of possibility for the full reconciliation of the Greek Catholic Church with Orthodoxy and the two Orthodox churches with one another and with the Ukrainian Catholics. Let me precisely present the ideas of these. We are bringing representatives from the three churches, not official representatives, actually, the Greek Catholic Church. There are three persons you all know from UKU, Anatoly Babinsky, Miroslav Marinovich, and Oleg Turi. From representing OKU will be Konstantin Sikhov and Archpriest George Kovalenko. And representing UOK will be Father Bureja and Father Chaika. There was going to be somebody else from Ukraine, but was not allowed to travel to Rome. And since Father Nestor Chaika was in Rome, he will be representing them. And along with it, we'll have 5 Orthodox theologians from global Orthodoxy working on precisely on the question of the Orthodox Church. Not the Orthodox churches, the different national churches, but how to construct a theology of the Orthodox Church, an ecclesiology of the Orthodox Church, and how to solve the fundamental tensions between all the autocephalous churches within the global Orthodoxy and the schism now between the two patriarchates. Not only the two, because this conflict with the two patriarchates has spilled over into Alexandria, into Antioch, into all of Africa, in all the diasporas in Asia, the diasporas in Europe, this conflict between Rome and Constantinople and the autocephalous churches in the diasporas basically is being repeated itself throughout global orthodoxy in the diaspora today. And the idea is, again, we have to start simply talking to one another, start the process, work together precisely, and eventually these different steps will hopefully lead to a possibility of true dialogue and eventually reconciliation based both on truth and justice. As you know, after the terrible oppression of racial apartheid in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established, saying, yes, we are ready to forgive and to allow even those who perpetrated crimes to be reintegrated into political life, to recognize them as people. But to do that, they have to simply first accept the truth of their own crimes. So there is an element of reckoning with the crimes that perhaps all parts have committed in a conflict like this one, although obviously the type of responsibility for some crimes will be much greater than for others. But nonetheless, there is the need for truth in order to have a just peace and reconciliation. So memory of all the victims, especially of all our victims, is equal. All the victims on all sides have to be recognized as victims, and all of them, as Taras Dobko has pointed out, they have to be our victims of all of us, so that then can we say we. The notion of we, the people, that is part of fundamental part of national solidarity, has to be added universal human solidarity and the solidarity of the Christian faith, brothers and sisters in the Christian faith, and brothers and sisters of all faiths as children of God. When solidarity, the great movement, poly-solidarity, was based precisely on three very different traditions of solidarity. Working class solidarity was one, and do you remember the workers at Gdansk in the strikes? But those workers were also taking communion while being on a strike. Catholic solidarity was a crucial component of the solidarity movement, and national solidarity that united all Poles, whether Christian or Catholic or Jewish, working class or not working class. So the notion is, and is today, as again we've heard, borders cannot be borders anymore. Human rights cannot stop at the borders. Today, in our global age, this is age of global migrations, of global pandemics, of global ecological crisis, of fundamental also conflicts and wars. And we simply need to go beyond national solidarity to be open to transnational solidarity. Of course, in the European Union, this is the greatness of the European Union, to have been able to overcome what was a system of national wars with one another. This was what the World War I, World War II, those were European wars where all the European nations were involved fighting with one another. And out of it came the notion of never again. We have to create a system in which war between us will no longer be the normal way of dealing with our differences, but we have to create a situation, a European Union, where we can have not only a common market, but a common civil society, a common solidarity. That's why also the issue of importance for Poland to join the European Union was so crucial, and for Ukraine today is so crucial also. But we cannot establish the European Union as a fortress of privileged people that are lucky enough to live now in one of the both wealthiest, safest, and more peaceful and more developed parts of the world. We have to have our walls open to those who actually come from countries that were colonized by Europeans. Europe has to recognize the history of colonization that it implanted on others, the same way that Russia has to recognize the colonization of Ukraine. So we have to live in a post-colonial sense of ourselves where we recognize the burdens the discolonization put to peoples across the Americas, the indigenous people, across Africa, across Asia. And those were all colonies of European countries. And there was this sense in which the superiority of white Europeans and of white Christendom over other religions, over other peoples. And unless we Europeans comes to terms also with this past, and we recognize it, it's very difficult precisely because today the populist parties are based on precisely using the immigrants as scapegoats for all the problems in society, blaming them for all the problems, for the inability of societies to work together. And so all these issues are interconnected, and we have to bring the resources of Christian solidarity and of transnational human solidarity in order to be able to reconstruct Ukraine and to reconstruct many other parts of the world which are in crisis, both in wars, famines, civil wars, and basically failed states in conditions which are as seriously critical as are those of Ukraine. We are living in entering a global age, a new age of history after Western hegemony, I would say, that forces us all to recognize the need to create a culture of the encounter with all the peoples of the earth, but not only with the peoples, but also with nature itself, with creation, because the ecological crisis, the pandemic, immigration, the growing inequality, all these crises cannot be solved by any nation alone. They will have to be solved together in solidarity of all the peoples. And this is obviously the message which the universal church has for us. And I think that in this respect, both Christian traditions, which are central to Ukraine, but also, of course, the Muslim tradition and the Jewish tradition, now the Protestant tradition, all three Christianities. In Ukraine, all three Christianities meet, let's say, Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox, and all three Abrahamic religions meet, the Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And in this respect, Ukraine can be, if Ukraine is able to find a way of reconciliation and working together among the three Romes, and bringing Protestant Christianity also to this dialogue, and again with the Muslim Tatars and what they represent also in the world of Islam, and of course Ukrainian Judaism and what it represents in the history of Judaism and Ukrainian relations, then of course the story of Ukraine can be one of a hope and reconciliation, not only for Ukraine itself, but for all of Europe, for the entire region, and one could even say for the entire world. So let's think in those terms. Let's think in those terms. What is at stake is not only to reconstruct our society, to go back where we were, but to construct a new society that precisely is going to be diverse, pluralistic, and open to the others, both East and West, North and South. With this, I thank you very much for your attention.